Vika, did you learn English there?
Да.
What were the first words?
How much? How much?
And what else?
Не помню, как презерватив по-английски.
Condom.
Without или...
With?
Да. Это первое, то, что научился. I how are you? How much?
I was born in Bulgaria. I was raised by my grandmother in our village. This was my world. That's me playing with our chickens. Each one had a name. We shared equal poverty under communism. Our lives were restricted, but I remember feeling safe, protected.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And then suddenly communism collapsed. Life as we knew it forever changed. Eastern Europeans rushed to the West, chasing dreams of freedom and a better life, leaving everything we knew behind. My mom and I packed up for America in 1990. I've often wondered what might have happened if we had stayed. 20 years later, I returned. The street where we played as kids was empty. The village of my youth, once full of life, was like a ghost town. Everyone who could had gone abroad, many to decent lives elsewhere. But there were others, the forgotten ones, who had been deceived, and had vanished into a world no one wanted to talk about. We were not ready for what came after 1989, and for many of the women of my generation, it was the brutal reality of sexual slavery. In my new life in America, I became a photojournalist. I've been haunted by questions. How could so many Eastern European women have fallen victim to sex trafficking? Where were the women who survived? Why were they silent? I've looked for answers for nearly a decade, tracking the story across 9 countries, from Eastern Europe to the West and to the Middle East. And as we say in Bulgarian, I entered the mouth of the wolf. I spent years gaining access to the places where these women were sold into prostitution. Trafficked women have been nameless and faceless for decades. Fear of retaliation keeps them quiet, and their silence perpetuates the vicious cycle. The UN estimates that nearly 1.5 million women have been trafficked into global sexual slavery, but the reality is that no one really knows. We can only guess how many women have been broken apart or killed in the global sex trade. Over time, I found women who survived. These girls want the world to see what they've endured. Vika was the first woman I interviewed. Over the course of 4 years, she told me what happened to her, little by little, piece by piece. This is how her story began.
И она предложила: хочешь, официанткой? Хочу. Туда, Дубай. Хочу. $500 в месяц. О, конечно хочу. Все, вот, завтра утром едем в Кишинев. У меня есть знакомые, сделать тебе документы, сделать тебе паспорт. Сейчас, когда я об этом все вспоминаю, боже, какая я была дура. Ну как можно повестись на такое, я не понимаю. Я была уже взрослой дурой. 19 лет я так подвелась, что шла на поводу только за денег. И до меня дошло, только когда мы уже прилетели в Дубай. Когда мы встретили этот Хасан. И моей, и Ваня приехали на квартиру. Когда он меня заставлял делать ему миньет, заставляла, как бы, чтобы я училась делать миньет. И тогда я спросила: зачем это нужно? Как зачем, что знаешь, что ты приехала? Я говорю: нет, я приехала в официантке. И тогда он мне уже все рассказал, что ты приехала тоже обслуживать, но не в официантке, а в проститутке.
Over the next 6 months, Vika was sold 3 times. Each time the pimps would beat her into submission. And the clients? Her youngest was 12. His father brought him to the brothel. Her oldest was 83.
Не дай Бог, конечно, чтобы это увидел, почувствовал. Просто из-за одного шага потом страдаешь всю свою жизнь. Всю жизнь страдаешь.
The story of the traffic girls is one recurring theme. No opportunity to have a decent life back home. Once you see where they come from and the living conditions they face, you begin to understand why young women are desperate to leave. Jenny is from Moldova, one of the poorest countries in Europe. She couldn't resist a job offer as a cleaning lady abroad.
Când trăiam în sat, casnic, cum s-ar spune, n-aveam nici casă, nici bani, nici masă, absolut nimic. Trăiam greu. Pe urmă am întâlnit cu o doamnă. Contract de muncă pe 6 luni. $200 pe lună, $1.200, cumpărăm casă, ne avem casa noastră. Și pornim acasă și voi la părinți. N-avem documente, am făcut, n-am. Plec liber la Moscova. De aici, la țară, nu știi unde e Moscova, nu știi prăjitul și înapoi. Și acolo ea ne-am aflat când ieșim la Turcia. Și am avut ocazia ca un șef de poliție, acolo, aeroport, eventual, cum ne da poliția. I-au spus că dacă dai la poliție, trebuia să se întorci toți banii înapoi, pe documente, așa, pe asta, pe biletul care l-au cumpărat pe drum, cheltuit până aici. Dacă e așa, de unde să iau banii să întorc înapoi? M-au vândut și am venit într-un barbei, cum s-ar spune. Și am fost nevoit să crez să fiu prostituat. Așa spusă. Eram închis fără pașapoarte, înăuntru lucram în afară, nu se vedea voi de oxie și toate geamurile închise, tot absolut. Permanent lucram, era, puteam să avem 50, bine, persoane. Dar nici nu mult, între mai bine să nu mai fi fost. Și am tot așa. Mai bine că n-am sărit, mai bine că trăiesc așa cum trăiesc acum.
La Strada operates the national SOS hotline for traffic victims from Moldova. They receive thousands of calls from women in distress, and thousands more from family members trying to find their missing daughters. For the past decade, La Strada has been the leading NGO, organizing awareness and prevention campaigns across Moldova, warning people about false job offers abroad.
The biggest number of these people are being deceived, and we all know that.
Anna Revenko runs La Strada. She's one of the key players fighting trafficking in Eastern Europe.
How did this happen? What happened to us? Like, how did we get lost as women? This is a whole generation of women. Talking to people, for example, in the United States, they say to me, there has to be a solution to this. This has to be eliminated. What would you say to this?
You're asking me so difficult questions. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I want to be realistic. The big discrepancy between poor countries and rich countries. The big discrepancy between access to justice. The high-level corruption. What? I'm not sure you want an answer from me unless we tackle these issues, all these hotlines, and will not solve the situation.
The hotlines do save lives, one girl at a time. But they're up against a dark world with an insatiable appetite. Since the collapse of communism, Turkey has been a primary destination for Eastern European women sold for sex. And like anywhere else, once the girl is sold into prostitution, it's nearly impossible to escape. Orica is from a village in Moldova. She was 18 when she was sold for sex in Turkey. She realized early on her pimples connected far beyond the brothel Iran.
Я робила такого, що вибирати. Тому що така поліція. Що ти машина, що я лику поліція сюди моя поліку. Я такі для машина, що високо поліція що заморяє. Що заморяє на уцем піяв норма. Що ти тоді на інтку до машина? Да если не норма. Що ти на сусідним камінь? Ще тут спимо на камінь, на пояску свистя. Я кому ферем, командиром партии, даем ждём лекаря русских, так не заметишь, что мы так другой. Что Орика работает, Орика работает.
In Istanbul, everyone knows where the foreign women are. But Aksaray is dangerous, and few are willing to take you there. The pimps make the rules around here. This is how it works. A woman is sold by a trafficker to a pimp. This becomes her debt. The pimp convinces the woman that the quicker she works it off, the quicker she'll be released. But the price for her freedom doesn't end there. She's charged for room and board, even for taking a shower. The pimps pocket everything she earns. A woman won't make a penny from servicing clients until these debts are repaid. But even after women pay off this so-called debt, many continue to work as prostitutes. They've been broken and believe there's no other choice.
Should I put it down?
Aksaray was a world Jenny was determined to escape.
În care ziua aceea, taman la este o sărbătoare, se numește Ramazan. Acolo, cum s-ar spune, pe musulmani nu prea scurtă cu fetele străine, numai cu soțiile lor. Și în timp ce nu prea erau pline. M-am trezit, m-am îmbrăcat. Am dus pe balcon, era ușa deschisă și mă cupără și am plecat. Dar n-am ajuns în pace.
She jumped, falling 3 floors. When she woke up, Jenny couldn't feel anything below her waist. She spent nearly a month in the hospital. But before she could receive surgery, the pimps were allowed to take her back to the brothel in Aksaray. No one cared that she was partially paralyzed from the fall, or that she defecated on herself. The clients continued coming. It was business as usual. Jenny had been held a virtual prisoner in a room in Aksaray. The district is also notorious for its sex clubs. I felt I owed it to the women I had met to try to expose that world, but getting inside would be risky.
Oh, you can't be I'm not fussy.
I met with an old Turkish friend who I trusted, named Mike. I told him I had a plan. What if I went undercover as a prostitute?
Yeah, I think you should find a safer way. You're a brave girl, but that is a tough place. What you want to do is not simple.
But there didn't seem to be another way. My plan was to go into Aksaray with men who knew the security guards and pimps in the clubs. They agreed to take me in posing as one of their prostitutes. Mike had some advice if I got inside.
Go to the main pimp, say, I came here to look for a job in Aksaray, in the bars. You keep smiling and show some of your leg, and you can say how much you're willing to pay. And he'll say, whatever, don't go too cheap, baby. Minimum 100, you worth more.
But I didn't plan on talking to anyone. My only intention was to document the inside of the clubs. What worried me the most was shooting it all with a hidden camera.
If they find out something tricky going on there, these bodyguards in front of the bar, they fucking knives. It might not end up good, believe me.
Security guards and pimps watch her every move. The women's bathroom was a sanctuary. Girls filed in and out, putting on their faces in tight dresses. I realized I was invisible to them. Their minds were elsewhere. Men waited. Time was money. Back in the club, dim lights and smoke concealed their scars. Their faces felt familiar. Ordinary girls who might have been friends or neighbors. And here we were tonight, together again for a moment. next morning, I headed back to my room. Oxidized sex clubs were nothing more than basements where grim transactions were made. But I had the luxury to leave and never return, unlike the women I had seen. Turkey is sensitive about its public image, especially since its recent attempt to join the EU. In all my trips to Istanbul, I could never get a government official to address the human trafficking problem in Turkey. The police do conduct raids to appease the international community, but they're mostly for show. The pimps are rarely charged. It's the women who are arrested and put in detention centers, and Turkey is no exception. Throughout the basements and sex clubs of Europe, as seen in this rape footage, trafficked women are a commodity to be exploited and expelled. For the traffickers, 1 kilo of cocaine, 1 AK-47, or 1 Moldovan girl is all the same. After a couple of months in prison, the women are deported to their countries of origin, penniless and used up. And destination countries like Turkey are glad to wash their hands of them.
Там уже девочки были по полгода, там по год, по 3 года. Они уже как-то привыкли к этому телу. Что тебе там нравилось? Все тебе издевались над твоим телом. А это что? Залез на тебя, сделал свое дело и слез дальше. Это издевательство было, и все.
Olesya was trafficked to Istanbul at the age of 23. She spent 3 months in an Aksaray brothel before a 16-year-old girl managed to call for help. The hotel was raided. After a month in prison, Olesya was deported. She returned to her home in Transnistria, an unrecognized territory tucked between Moldova and Ukraine. It's an increasingly popular source country for traffickers.
Were the clients always using protection?
Нет, не хотели. Не хотели. Никто не хотел. Мы уже боялись, нас уже милиция отвезла проверить нас, чем в больные там спит или еще что-то. Мы уже молились, просили Бога, чтобы все было нормально. Потому что там пугали, что у кого спит, там все сжигают. Правда это у вас там?
Back in her village, Olesya was reunited with her mom and Sasha, her 6-year-old son. Their life remains a daily struggle.
Нет защиты никакой. Вот был бы мужик вот какой-то возле дома, вот нормальный, чтобы помог бы. Вот, а тут 2 женщины, никого нету. И боишься даже ночью спать, вот, не дай бог. Потому что люди разные, алкаши, бродяги, что вообще не имеют даже своего дома. И ходят, воруют, то картошку скопают, то еще что-то делают. А ты мучишься.
About 15 miles from Olesya's village is Moldova's capital, Chisinau. It's a clearinghouse, a city where women are often kept before being trafficked elsewhere. In fact, Moldova has become infamous as Europe's biggest exporter of women. The Center for Prevention for Trafficking of Women is headquartered in Chisinau. It's run by Ion Bistoga, an attorney who has prosecuted hundreds of trafficking cases. I first met Ion 7 years ago. I asked him to explain why trafficking continues to plague the region.
Explicația este foarte simplă. Vin donații din străinătate în procesul combaterii traficului umane în Republica Moldova. În aceste donații, cel mai mult are de primit statul, deoarece își menține structura sa statală. Poliție, penitenciare, sistem medical, sistem asistență socială.
So where does the money go?
Banii ajung la funcționari pentru a-și crea condiții normale de lucru.
Money goes to public officials in there somewhere. Do they live well?
O duc foarte bine.
So then it never really reaches the villager somewhere in some village in Moldova.
Banii nu ajung nimijlocit la victimă, pentru reabilitarea acestei victime.
That's very frustrating.
Asta este situația reală. Eu am drept să spun acest fapt, deoarece fenomenul traficului continuă până în ziua de astăzi, deși se investesc bani în trafic de 10 de ani. Într-un sat cu o populație de 2000 populație, dacă sunt 50 de locuri de lucru. Tineretul, în principiu, nu are de ales decât a merge în activități criminale sau în riscul de a fi traficat. Și persistă riscul ca Republica Moldova, ca stat independent și suveran, să trezească fără cetățeni.
Moldova is not alone. My own village in Bulgaria is suffering a similar fate. It was painful to see the bakery where we bought bread as children, shut and covered with obituaries. The disco and restaurant that housed the village weddings looks like a bombed-out building. The bridge that was once so full of people you couldn't even pass is hardly crossed. And those who remain spend their days waiting for night to fall.
Бабу, има ли много хора, които са тръгнали по чужбина?
Има много. Целият свет е тръгнал по чужбина.
И защо?
Защото няма живот тук, малко пари дава.
Like many other women in our village, my grandma worked the tobacco fields. When I was growing up, Bulgaria had the highest percentage of employed women in the world, and under communism, they earned the same wages as men. But when the system collapsed and the free market arrived, the dream of gender equality was over. The factories shut down. No one had any work. Our village emptied out. All across Eastern Europe, millions of people migrated for work in the West. Those who stayed behind were families without the resources to leave, and the elderly.
Мимче. Ще си така много ти красиво момиче.
To jest tak, że myślisz seriożno, jak nestata, że to.
Co to wszystko się zawiesiło?
Ej,
But could you just call the police?
Italia, Spagna e Grecia.
This is the closest thing America.
Foto moda na che poi c'è legal. Ma
c'è legal,
ma c'è
Poi the tattoo for people to do.
Ama ena tam kadar tam Italia. Emu Italia başı. Ama kadar koy biraz. Mogu super interesuado.
Na celu как живота?
Меня это вином вебадочка. Она детато, porque что делать, но мы что-то на таком Америка.
With course that.
Не могу это. Ничто.
Not everyone who goes abroad is deceived. Many find legitimate work. But what makes it easier for traffickers is that few parents ask questions once their children leave. I left my village and headed through the Balkans, following a route traffickers often use to transport women right next door, to Greece. For the first time in my 7 years of reporting on this issue, I had finally been granted an interview with law enforcement. I met with Police Major George Vanikiotis, who heads the anti-trafficking unit in Athens.
But these girls, they're coming totally alone here. There's no family ties behind. Sometimes they ask me, the lawyers, why she didn't call her mother? Her mother where? Probably there's no phone over there. We have to understand that they are living in another world. Not in this world, not in the Western civilized world as we call it. Okay, we want to call it. I don't know if it's civilized or not, this is another matter. But
I asked Vanikiotis, how could sex trafficking flourish in this Western civilized world?
you start with a very, very sensitive matter for the National Police. Okay, corruption. We're not angels. We have problems. Corrupted police officers, and usually with the matters of trafficking, they are giving protection to the criminals. If you ask a police officer to take 2 kilos of heroin to bring it somewhere, the majority, the 99.99% are going to say no. But here, if you tell him, this is some girls over here, most of the police officers don't receive money. Usually they receive the help. This is the worst, because they don't understand the importance of the crime.
Indeed, the corruption couldn't be more blatant.
This is police?
Yes. As you can see, in all the countries, the police, the pimps,
and the girls. From the same block. Yeah.
Here in Athens, women are trafficked from all over the world, but the Nigerian prostitutes are usually the only ones you see on the street.
Keep down your camera. It's a good dangerous problem.
Vanikiotis tells me these women believe in voodoo curses traffickers put on them back in Nigeria. Fear holds them in check. But women trafficked from other countries are kept locked in apartments throughout Athens.
Some of those are Nigerian.
Konstantinos Kambourakis is an HIV prevention doctor. He distributes condoms to women in the brothels.
When you go inside, what's the first thing that you see?
First thing, meat. It's not the bad place. It's not the first thing, but the last. The last is Spain.
When the clients of the area were tired of the girls, they would report them. The police were corrupt, men the police. So they would arrest the girls, send them back home, they'll bring new girls, because the customers wanted new girls.
Niki Rubani runs a shelter for trafficked girls in Athens.
Prostitution and trafficking has nothing to do with sex. It has to do with power. It's violence. And no girl is asked, okay, would you rather become a nurse or a prostitute? We say, I'd rather become a prostitute. But if she's raped and raped and raped, then she will see herself.
Those girls are new entry.
They're so young.
Yeah, no more than 20.
Greece is an EU country, a gateway to the West. But the women who are trafficked here fall into a brutal system that's constantly adapting.
They organize crime like the terrorist groups now, small cells. 3-4 persons. These people, they are doing only forgery, passports. 3-4 persons, they are taking care of the girls from the every day. Other persons, they are exploiting them. They are recruiters. So if the police manage to arrest one cell, they don't know the others. That's the reason that nobody can really destroy them. Totally.
No one knows that better than Niki, who often shelters women in her own home. She invited me to her birthday party. Her family and close friends were gathered around. I noticed a woman in a green dress sitting in the background. This was Irina, and she was Bulgarian. 15 years ago, Irina was trafficked to Athens. Eventually, she escaped her captors, but she still works in the sex trade.
Ты сама можешь это виновна. Я же виновна. Как ты это можешь там? Можешь вроде. Аз не мога съм там. Не мога. Трябва да работя. Не съм меланхолия.
Когато се чувстваш тъжна, какво правиш?
Какво правя? Излизам тъжна. Мислям. И най-вече ако много. Колко ти умилявам, да не мисля за нищо. Вели как писаеш?
I offered to take Irina back to Bulgaria, to the children she left behind. She turned my offer down.
Когда до меня дошло, что я не знаю где, не знаю с кем, не знаю, чего они говорят, не знаю, чего они хотят. Умеешь говорить по-английски? Little. Что ты умеешь? How much? Больше ничего.
I promised Vika I would find my way to Dubai, where she was trafficked. I wanted to expose the hell she had been through. What I found was a place like no other. Dubai is the playground of the Middle East. More than 80% of the people living here are foreign-born. Men outnumber women nearly 3 to 1. Disposable cash, busy schedules, and persistent loneliness fuel the demand for prostitution. Everywhere else I had been, prostitution was hidden away in red light districts. In Dubai, it's on display in some of the fanciest clubs and hotels. And the supply of women is abundant. Not only Eastern Europeans, women from all over the world end up in prostitution here. Some come knowing the nature of the work. Others were trafficked to Dubai. How they got here may be different, but so many remain because the money in Dubai is hard to turn down. The majority of women in these clubs work as independent agents. Everyone assumed I was a prostitute from Eastern Europe. I played along. The guy wanted to know what he could get for 500 dirhams, about $150 US. Price depends on nationality. Eastern women fetch the highest amount, up to $1,000 per night. The women spill out of the clubs at 3 a.m. Men bargain for discounts. The taxis take them to the hotels. And when the call to prayer sounds at dawn, it reminds the woman her shift has ended.
Being globalized place with minimal regulations, and this is where it is exploited.
Even this human rights activist explained Dubai's hypocrisy as an unavoidable consequence of globalization.
And our legal system isn't really growing fast to catch, because also our government is scared of regulations that they may, turn off businesses or investors and, in all these developments and so on. But this is about capitalism. You invented it. You brought it to the world. We are just being, the latest students of the system.
But Dubai's nightclubs aren't the only places following the laws of supply and demand. Locked away in brothels are women forced to sell sex. Traffickers bring them here, and anyone can have them for a few dollars. That's what happened to Vika.
Vika, who are the clients? Who? Арабы, молдаване, русские, англичане, американцы, все. Индусы, пакистанцы. От низкого до самого верха. Понимаешь?
To break her in, Vika was forced to have sex with the constant stream of the laborers who build the city's skyscrapers. Up to 30 men per day would pay the madam $3 for a few minutes of sex with Vika.
Первый клиент, с которым я там имела связи, с первым клиентом он вел меня без презерватива. И от первого же клиента я забеременела. До 9 месяцев я продана 3 раза. Но когда девушка беременна, за нее просто вдвойне. За нее дают вдвойне денег. Последний, она мне специально купила раскладушку. У меня уже был живот большой. Она купила мне раскладушку, и раскладушки сделала дырку. Что когда я буду с клиентами на животе, живот свисал, чтобы им было удобно.
What did you say now?
Ой, я говорила, что там я не имею никакого слова. Даже если не заплатят, я должна стать раком, чтобы меня поимели. Я должна. Если я скажу нет, меня выбросят с 15-го этажа. И никто ничего не сделает. Не выбросят, утопят в океане, в песке закопают. И никто тебя не искать не будет.
Vika finally escaped the brothel with the help of a client. A few months later, she gave birth to a daughter. Vika was deported back to Moldova and had to leave her daughter behind. She's never seen her since. On the last night in Dubai, my camera woman and I returned to our hotel room. It had been ransacked. My notebooks and equipment were gone. When I reported the robbery, the authorities didn't care. It became clear that we had been watched and followed the whole time. Luckily, I had hidden our footage. It was time to go.
This is Vika traffic to Dubai. I mean, just give us a real understanding this is global. And it's really overwhelming. Just as you're reading, to just be like, my God.
Since I started this work, my mission has always been to bring these women and their stories to light, and to let the public know. But I realize all of this is incomplete. One group has always remained elusive. The pimps, the clients, the traffickers, those responsible for the women's pain. For me, to find them, it would mean one last trip.
Now what happens? As I told you before you went over to do some of this filming and interviewing and undercover activity you're going to do, you have to consider all the what ifs, and we talked about this.
I needed the guidance of someone I trusted. Joe Davidson is a retired FBI agent and a friend.
What if the police show up? You can't count on them being the good guys in these countries.
Joe has spent a lifetime witnessing the darkest chambers of the criminal mind. He felt another trip would be too risky.
At some point, you got to quit. These crime syndicates have a total lack of respect for life, and the laws and the penalties and the chance of getting punished are so minimal compared to the amount of wealth that they can accumulate that they don't care. And so you have to remember that when you're dealing with these
people. For the first time, I wasn't sure how I would do this. I was worried, but I knew where I had to go. To the place where most of the women I photographed were sold. Back to Turkey. Once in Istanbul, I went to see Mike again. I thought he could help me.
I'm trying to get an interview here. With the pimp. On camera.
You ready? Go ahead.
I'm looking. He's outside. But the problem is...
He's not there right now, but I see.
Mike told me to give him a day or two. He'd do what he could. A couple of days later, Mike introduced me to Erhan, a well-connected guy who used to run a popular club in Aksaray.
But he says these people will not interview with you for these things.
Even if I don't show their face?
Yeah, they will know whether you show the face or you don't show the face.
What about this? You know someone who used to do this and now no longer does this?
Erhan seemed amused that I would even ask to interview the men of Aksaray. Maybe that's why he gave it a shot.
Okay, he'll try to find someone.
This would not be the first time I spoke with men who profit from the sex trade. But now I was approaching them as a journalist, not posing as a prostitute. It was going to be hard to get anyone to talk on camera. As promised, Erhan called in a favor. He introduced me to a man who manages a hotel in Aksaray. The guy had been in the heart of the sex trade for the last 10 years. He was willing to talk, but his friends were more reluctant. They kept interrupting the interview.
O ülkeden buraya zorla getirilmiş bir tür yok. Yaptığı işleri kendileri bilerek geliyorlar. Yani burada gelip paylaşılık yapacakları fikirler. Moldova, Rus, Ukrayna hepsi geliyormuş. Sen de saat ayarladın. Bırakın ben konuşmak istiyorum. Bulaşık yıkayandan, tutun da, milletvekiline kadar herkes var. Eskileri rekabet göstermiyor. Onların daha neşeli, daha cilveli olabilmeleri için patronları, içtikleri, içkilerin içine veya kolanın içine uyuşturucu esek yaptırıyor. Abi anlatıyorum, zaten buraya.
Have you heard of any girls jumping from buildings to escape?
Duydum. Genelde polisten kaçar. Bir de bizim çok aşık olan Türk erkeklerinin öldürdüğü birkaç tane.
So what you're saying is that the girls who jump sometimes from the buildings, they're jumping either because there's a police knocking on the door or there is a crazy client who's in love with them and wants them and they're too afraid to jump.
While my question was being translated, he must have had a moment of sympathy for the women.
Normal bir yaşam sürmüyorlar. Buraya geldiklerinde kabul ettikleri işler, bir zaman sonra onlara nedenler, bunaltıcı sıkıcı gelmeye başlıyor ve bunu alkolle, uyuşturucuyla bastırmaya çalışıyorlar. Farklı yollarda kendini yok edebiliyor.
And that's as far as the interview went. I'd wanted to ask him more about the clients, their particular obsession with Eastern European women. Natasha, once a fictional KGB agent, became the name used for every prostitute from the former Soviet bloc. And 20 years later, she's still in high demand. And if you ask the clients to list their preference, they answer consistently.
Russian woman, Russian woman, Russian woman, Russian woman.
Erhan called in another favor. He introduced me to 2 clients.
We are meeting with them on the clubs. We are going to the hotel.
They were both cops, and they couldn't brag enough about how many so-called Natashas they paid for. It was shocking.
You know, I told you about what my project is about, yeah? It's about women from Eastern Europe and how after the collapse of communism, so many women had to leave their villages and their towns looking for work.
Yes.
And sometimes they would be promised real jobs in other countries.
Yeah, right.
And then they would come to the other country and they would be forced to sell themselves to be prostitutes.
Yeah.
Have you heard about this or no?
Yeah, so they are working. I respect them.
You respect them, right?
So we need the women, so we are being together with them.
When you go
And as if Istanbul wasn't enough, these cops travel to the poorest countries in Europe for sex tourism.
Tell me which country.
Belarus?
Okay.
Yes.
Belarus, Romania, Transnistria,
Yeah.
Moldova,
Yes.
and
Bulgaria.
okay, and
And enough? What and?
that's it.
That's
And what is your experience from those countries?
experience. All of these countries, there are many beautiful women.
What-
So they are making very good sex. They are making good blowjob. How can I tell you? Just it's very exciting and different to be with them in their country. Because we feel very freedom ourselves there. Because
And they told me that in places like Transnistria, they get young girls for as little as $10 a night. The cops, the politicians, the uncles and shop owners, fishermen and husbands, men fuel the demand for prostitution. But trafficking also depends on the complicity of women, neighbors, friends, and relatives who sell their own. Vika, Zhenya, Olesia, each was recruited and sold by a woman. Throughout the villages of Eastern Europe, traffickers seem to operate with impunity. They count on women keeping quiet, but Olesia had other plans.
Я сказала, потом он на второй день приехал, этот Игорь, сутенер, и привез маме $100. Говорит, возьми $100, закрой свой рот. Она говорит, забери свои нахер грязные деньги и уходи отсюда, что я тебя не видела.
Olesia and her mom went to the police. They knew others who had been trafficked from their village, but those girls wouldn't testify. The trafficker had secured their silence.
А там он заплатил деньги им там. И им было хорошо, для меня одной было только плохо, а им было хорошо. Просто все деньги, вот, платили деньги, и все было нормально. Или они боялись, или что, я не знаю.
Whether with cash or intimidation, traffickers know how to beat the system. When I went to see a trial in Moldova's capital, the accused trafficker didn't even bother to show up. The cage that normally holds the accused remained empty. Criminals avoid prosecution. It's the women who bear the burden. When they press charges, the women go public. And back in their villages, they're stigmatized as prostitutes. But Olesia chose to deal with the consequences.
Расскажу. Буду говорить, вот твоя мама какая была. Конечно, он сейчас не понимает, и никто ничего не скажет. А когда подрастет, мне будет стыдно.
After jumping from the third floor in Turkey, Jenny was permanently disabled. The pimps deemed her damaged goods and sent her back to her parents in Moldova. But not before they found a replacement. The pimps forced her older sister to prostitute for a month to repay Jenny's debt, before they let both girls return to their family.
And when you jumped, what were you thinking?
Mama.
Were you close to her when you were growing up? And now? Why?
Я за обедом мама наклюнула.
Shenya's parents are both alcoholics. They often drink away her disability checks. And her parents are no exception. Homemade wine rules around here, and most are married to the bottle. And like Zhenya, so many girls grow up with alcoholic parents and grim prospects. These girls are the easiest prey for traffickers. Just up the road is the school Zhenya once attended. There I met with teenage girls, an age group most at risk.
Чего не сказал мне, что такое тут идва до тази страни и някой ги продава на сила, например? Кои страни?
Мама тя, друга страна, намного години, не страчи. Очень приятно, се дослушаш прямо се песня.
Кой те гледа там?
Стани.
Смятате ли, че можете да вярвате на хора? Да имате доверие към хора? Към кого?
Аз съм приятел.
The girls knew about trafficking and the risks involved, yet they were still willing to trust. Uncertainty about their future outweighed everything else.
Не мога да си представя какво ще бъде през 5 години.
Young people have similar concerns everywhere. But in villages with so few opportunities, the odds are against them. When I first met Zhenya's niece, Katerina, she was a child. She's now 12. Her aunt was trafficked. Her mom fell into the same trap. And I worry what will happen to Katerina and to so many other girls like her.
Если у меня была бы какая-то возможность как-то предотвратить все это, остановить кого-то от этого, если бы я могла, я бы чем могла, чем помогла.
As Vika, what she would say to young women thinking of going abroad?
Захоти, за много не бегай. Где много, это не твое. Ты вот понемножку по чуть-чуть заработай, собери. И когда будет у тебя много, вот тогда это будет твое. Это мое, и у меня много. Я сама заработала здесь, не там. Меня никто не бил, никто не унижал, никто не ебал. Я здесь заработала как швея. И это мое, и мне это нужно. Вот так нужно. И я была дура, что уехала. И зачем за $500, что я хотела? Многие девочки думают, что я поеду, у меня получится, я сильная. Если нет, я приеду, это не очень сильно ошибаются, очень сильно ошибаются. Даже не думала, что... Да вообще... Задаю вопрос.
To find out what you can do to help, visit priceofsex.org and get involved.